The House will please come to order. Without objection, select guests will be granted privileges of the floor. Attendance roll call will now be taken. Do not register until you hear the bell. The House will proceed to register. Members, the prayer today will be by Reverend David Felton, guest of member Charlene Fernandez, and the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, led by member Pamela Powers Hanley. Will the House and the gallery please rise?
I invite you to take a moment to take a deep breath, and clear your mind, and be present to this time and this place. We gather today in the midst of stressful, often anxious lives, acknowledging that our civic leaders' opportunity to serve often requires difficult decisions. As our representatives work to weave together a community of people with different backgrounds, values, and priorities, may they see clear patterns emerging, patterns of equality, respect, and transformation between both friends and the estranged. Especially as we find ourselves caught up in difficult life circumstances, may our leaders be guided by a commitment to fairness, equity, compassion, and justice. We are grateful for those here today serving in the capacity as leaders in their communities and in our state. We're also grateful that dedication to public service is still considered a virtue in our country, and that our expectations for our leaders is high. May grace, wisdom, and a vision of a more just and compassionate world be our representatives' companions on their journey today. Amen.
Members, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So you'll need to note the attendance, Brent.
Clerk will note the attendance as 59 present, 1 absent. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I rise to a point of privilege of the House. I move that notwithstanding any other House rule, first and second reading of House Resolution 2003 will be waived and House Resolution 2003 be placed on third reading of bills for today.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor vote aye. Opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, and so ordered.
Third reading of bills.
House Resolution 2003, resolution expelling Don Sheet from the House of Representatives.
You've heard the third reading of H.R. 2003. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Please wait for the bell. The House will now proceed to vote. Mr. Shooter, you may explain your vote. Into the microphone, though, please.
Members, I just want to say a brief statement, and then I'm going to make it easy for you all. I want to thank the people of District 13 who sent me up here. 7 some odd years ago, I came up as a write-in candidate. My neighbors sent me up here to clean house, to balance the budget, to fight for them. and even people that couldn't fight for themselves I fought for. The real obscenity in this place is not anything that I said, but the fact that we steal toothpaste money from developmentally disabled people. That's obscenity. So here's what I'm going to say. It's been my honor to represent the people of District 13. I have faithfully executed my duties. I've never taken bribes. I've never considered one way or another except on the merits of a bill. I've said stupid things. I've done stupid things. I stood on the carpet. I took it like a man. I apologized. Can't go back to the past. I can't change it, but I can change the future if given the opportunity. And frankly, you do whatever you need to do. Any of my people who are my friends and feel like they owe me anything, you don't owe me anything. You owe the people of the state of Arizona something. Let the facts speak for themselves. There's booklets in my office if you want to know what prompted this thing. And I hope I don't lose by one vote. I don't think I will. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Mr. Shooter, how do you vote?
I vote no.
Mr. Shooter votes no. Mr. Clark,
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to explain my vote.
please proceed.
Speaker and members, it is inescapably true that one of our colleagues has failed to live up to the standards of decency in this chamber. It is clear that Mr. Shooter was aware of his continual behavior and objectionable to many, and that he was unwilling to change his ways. Having had a constituent who was very dear to me come to me with concerns about Mr. Shooter, a person who only wants to do her job for the people of this state, I have come to believe that the time is now. I believe that this particular motion should fall upon the shoulders of other men. I hope that the men in this body will stand with the women in this body. Men need to be introspective enough to consider how our culture has too often failed to give us the tools to value and consider women on equal terms. Men need to be empathetic enough to listen to the stories of the countless women who have been harassed, shunned, or even violated in the face of power because of their gender. Men need to hold other men accountable. The decision of expulsion today will make it very clear to our constituents that this is a line in the sand and that we will no longer stand for behavior that was once accepted as boys being boys. And I vote aye.
Mr. Clark votes aye. Mr. Stringer.
I'm going to use another mic. My cord seems to be stuck here.
I promise you that was not on purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I have voted no here today, but it's not because I condone sexual harassment of women or sexual harassment or any kind of harassment of anyone. If all the allegations against Mr. Shooter were true, then he might well warrant the discipline that has been proposed here today. But my problem is that I don't really know that he did the things that he's accused of doing. I find very fundamental violations of due process in the report that we have been handed. None of those witnesses were ever sworn. None of that testimony, none of those statements were ever given under oath. I, as a finder of fact and someone who must sit in judgment of a colleague have never had the opportunity to make an independent assessment of the credibility of those witnesses. I don't believe I can delegate that to an investigator who writes a report. That report is full of findings of fact and opinions that may be true, that if I had the opportunity to make an independent assessment, that I very well might agree with. But the problem is, I haven't been given an opportunity. None of us have been given an opportunity to assess the credibility of these witnesses, to make an independent determination, an independent judgment as to their credibility and to the facts that we believe are true. And Mr. Shooter has never been given an opportunity to confront those witnesses and to examine them under oath. So I find very fundamental violations of due process. I am concerned more about the procedure that we are following today than I am about the merits of the allegations of Mr. Shooter. There is something more important at stake, and that is that the procedure we follow in this chamber. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I cannot justify supporting your motion with all respect, that I must vote no, and I hope that this procedure is never followed again. I would hate to be a victim. I would hate for any of you to be subject to this kind of a process. And if you ever are, and I'm here, I will vote no. Thank you.
Mr. Stringer votes no. Mr. Cardenas,
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within the report, pages 43 through 47 is an interview that said investigators had with me. I did it in front of 2 investigators along with staff, and I was afraid to do it. Here at the legislature, I survive mainly on my relationships with people and maintaining good relationships. And so the days leading up to when they called me, about a week before, I worried that if I spoke out, my bills are going to die. I worried that I was going to have being a representative for my district, my job is to deliver on the things that I promised I would deliver to them. But at the same time, I also realized that why I should agree to be interviewed was that I realized that throughout this country, the movement of women speaking out against sexual harassment and people on Facebook and Twitter and in social media saying that I support you, I realized that it started with me, and I realized that if I had the opportunity to speak out, if women were being sexually harassed, if they were being violated, it was upon men to support them. And that's why I did it. I stand by every single word that I said. I witnessed it myself. And if Mr. Stringer so chooses, I'm happy to go under oath with him, or whoever he chooses. I witnessed it. I'm standing for women today, and that's why I'm in the report. I vote yes.
Mr. Cardenas votes yes. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Do you wish to explain your vote?
Yes, sir, I do.
Please proceed.
And thank you for that opportunity. This body, we members, we are imperfect ourselves, and we all know that. Every one of us has flaws and character problems and issues, and you know, we're a group of human beings, and we make mistakes, and we're imperfect. I want to state right now that I do not approve of Mr. Shooter's actions, Representative Shooter, and the comments, and they should be condemned and reprimanded and never excused. And with the strongest voice, I say no to that kind of action. However, I believe it's up to the people of his district to either expel him or not. I think that is the real judging body. And I am willing to censure Mr. Shooter, reprimand him, admonish him, and everything that we can do. But when it comes to expulsion, you know, look at yourselves. I think it's better for the people of his district to make that decision. And with that, I vote no.
Mr. Campbell votes no. Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Ms. Ugenti Rita is my seatmate and a friend. Mr. Mitchell is a friend. Many people in this body are friends. Mr. Shooter is a friend. The accusations go beyond friendship. What has been done to my seatmate, Ms. Ugenti Rita, things have been said about my friend, Mr. Mitchell, and others in this body are unacceptable. All of us must pick a time when we stand up for what is fair and what is just. And at this moment, in spite of my friendship for Mr. Shooter, and in spite of my friendship for Ms. Ugenti Rita, who is my seatmate, my friendship for Mr. Mitchell and so many others in this body, because it is just and fair, I vote yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Lawrence votes yes. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is a sad day in the House, a difficult day, a historic day, but not in a good way. I remember when I first ran for office, I was talked into running by a friend of mine. And when I won my primary, I came down here to the Capitol because I had never been here before. Came in with 32 other freshmen, and many of them had never been here before. And we tried to learn the rules of the road here, and we tried to put forth the best effort we possibly can. But I have a friend of mine who's an economist and speaks all over the world and works with a lot of different political bodies all over the world. And one thing he told me before I took office, he said, very few people come out of politics morally better or as good as they went in. This job not only gives us a title, but in some cases makes us feel entitled. We are public servants. We have to have a servant's heart. I think we have a member today that I think has lost his way on that worldview. And I'm sorry that this is what it's come to. There were other alternatives that were available to this individual, that this vote didn't have to take place. We didn't have to harm ourselves and this body by having this vote. Whether you think the report was too much or too little, there are clear paths to dismissal of this member from this House. In that report, we would have come to this conclusion no matter how we did this thing. There's clear bad behavior that we would not wish upon our mothers, our sisters, our wives, our nieces, or otherwise. This is a difficult day. It's not a good day. I would just ask that you would vote your conscience, be able to defend what you think. The members who have been spoken up, I think they have a fair and balanced view of why they're doing what they're doing. But I do believe that this individual needs to be removed from our fellowship, and we need to have that seat occupied by someone, hopefully, who understands that this is a place to serve the public and not let the worser angels of their nature rule their activities and their conduct while in office. With that, I vote aye.
Mr. Allen votes aye. Mr. Kern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I want to get this done. This is a very, 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 very hard vote for all of us. And I want to say thank you, Mr. Speaker, for I do believe you've tried to be very fair in this. And I want to thank you for that. I do believe that. I also know that the voters have sent me here to do what's right. Whatever political ramifications are for a vote that I would put on that board, it's up to the voters to decide whether to continue to elect me or not elect me. This is a very, very tough decision. And last night I called a few members, and we all leaned on the side of censorship and not expulsion because we did not believe this rose to the level of expulsion, what was in that report. Then again, we did get an email this morning, and the phone call that was made to the subject in that email of the person actually now being drawn out again into this fiasco, this whatever you want to call it. And my heart grieves for that victim. My heart grieves for the victims in this report. Talking with my wife, she had experienced sexual harassment on a job that she worked at. I have experienced sexual harassment on a job that I worked at. It is not a good feeling. It's repulsive. The things that I read in this report are very repulsive to me. We should be much better than this as leaders of our state. I've been down here 4 years, and I've been taken aback at some of the things that I've seen and heard happen in this place. That is not why I'm here. I'm here to change policy. I'm here to do what's right in my philosophy and in my opinion and for the voters of my district. It's hard to sit in judgment of a colleague. Very, very, very difficult. Somebody mentioned the friendship of Don Shooter. I like Don Shooter as a person. My heart grieves for Don Shooter putting himself in this predicament. If Don Shooter was an employee of mine, he would have been fired. But this is different. The voters have allowed Mr. Shooter to be here, and it's very difficult for me to look at the voters and say, we're going to now remove the person that you elected to represent your district. I also want to say that this report, I think the investigators were trying to be very thorough, and no, I don't want to say anything bad about. I think they were trying to be fair. I think that what was in the report, the information that was in here, I agree with most of it. But I do want to mention before I cast my vote, I want to draw attention to page 73, and I will be drafting a letter to the Attorney General and the Maricopa County Attorney in response to an alleged unwelcome, harassing, and offensive communication by a Mr. Brian Townsend. The investigators in this report came to the conclusion, and I will read it before I sit down, the conclusion that they came up, and this is sexual messages, whatever that means, was sent to staffers in this body. The investigators came to the conclusion of, while we conclude the foregoing incidents occurred, we give credible evidence supports only a finding that Mr. Townsend acted alone and without a member of this body's knowledge or participation when committing the egregious and potentially unlawful acts. So according to this report and according to the investigators, there were potential unlawful acts, and I want those thoroughly investigated. And I will be drafting that letter. So now for the vote. I came in this morning, I was going to lean on censorship until I was in that room, and I understand the position you've been put in, Mr. Speaker. And this is very hard because, again, we're sitting in judgment. But I see my member behind me. He does have another option. Instead of putting us all in this place, he could choose to remove himself from this body, even knowing that you're probably going to get the votes for this expulsion.
Mr. Kern, how do you vote?
And with that offends me. I appreciate every member in this body. With that, I vote aye.
Mr. Kern votes aye. Mr. Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been 25 plus years
Explain your
since
vote,
I became.
Mr. Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to explain my vote, if I may.
Proceed.
Thank you. It's been 25 years since I was first elected to this body, and have not served continuously in this body in that time. But I have certainly seen through my time here things happen that were less than savory. But it has been an honor to know and to work with many, many, many people who have upheld the integrity of this place by their staff assistance, their research assistance, their active participation as citizens and the lobbying community who represents citizens, as well as fellow colleagues on the floor right now. No, none of us are perfect. May I ask you to see in your mind a circle? Outside of that circle is licensure, as in free license to do whatever you wish. But when you choose certain circles, to live in those circles, to act in those circles, you accept the responsibilities that go along with the circle. In my mind, I see the circle of a citizen of the United States of America. Once accepted, there are responsibilities, either well taken, well carried, or not. There are smaller circles. We make subcircles. We make them regarding decisions of faith. To participate in a organized religion or faith, there are responsibilities to that faith. And within that faith, should we act in discord with that circle, we can be expelled from that circle, as we can as citizens. Service clubs, organizations that we're all familiar with, employment. There are circles of responsibility. This circle, to be asked, to ask and to be accepted by the citizens of one's district, to serve within this circle, has its attendant responsibilities. There are unfairnesses, there are things that happen to us that we wish would be done in a more open manner, etc., etc. But we do accept certain responsibilities. And we must admit that we accept certain ideals of deportment. This is a heavy day, as has been said, but it's very simple in my mind. There comes for all of us a time when we must accept the responsibilities of this circle to serve in the House of Representatives. We may all fall a little short on many of those, but one is the deportment of membership and how it casts a light on the entire body. I am voting in favor of this resolution. I am extremely saddened through the 25 years of my association, closely associated here, to have to stand here. But I accepted the responsibility, not just of deportment, but to uphold the standard. That is what it means to me to be a conservative. I must accept the responsibility. And I took an oath. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, and it's heavy, I must vote aye. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bowers votes aye. Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. So I've heard a lot of good things said today, and as Don Shooter's seatmate from LD 13, I feel a need to speak to this issue, to represent my district, and also, since Mr. Shooter's bad behavior, which is the result of why we are here, also afforded me a chapter in his book, which I do not appreciate. And there are many victims, and there are many people who feel like victims, but there's only one person that's responsible for this today, and it's Don Shooter. We're not here because of a political vendetta or because it's a hack job. I've heard all sorts of things about this report. My experience with the special legal counsel on this is very professional and very thorough. And what I found in the part that I have firsthand knowledge of is very accurate. But it's also very limited because I know that the corroborated evidence in my case was much more extensive than what's printed in this report. It's much more vulgar and it's much more obscene. I cannot read to you on the floor what my seatmate said about me and my wife. It's simply that obscene. That should tell you something. It's not acceptable behavior anywhere, but it's not acceptable behavior among peers in the State House of Representatives. For those who think that he's a good old boy, a class clown, who means well but just doesn't know how to behave, I can't disagree with you more. Don has been my seatmate for 6 years. I have dealt with this behavior for 6 years. For the freshmen coming in who wondered why Don and I do not get along, it's not because we just don't like each other. It's because of this behavior. It's been systematic. It's gone on. He gets away with it. He's able to weasel himself into approach chairmanships, which has a lot of power. And with that power, you can do all sorts of things. Obviously, what was printed in this report about me was not a serious sexual, violent threat. I think I'm capable of defending myself. But what would he do to a young intern? What would he say? Or how would he behave to a 22-year-old girl in his office? Or a lobbyist who has a job to perform and feels like she may lose her job if she doesn't tolerate this type of behavior. The report concluded in its opening statements, its summary, that there is credible evidence that Mr. Shooter has violated this policy, and by his repeated, pervasive conduct has created a hostile working environment for his colleagues and those with business before the legislature. There is no doubt in my mind that's true, at a minimum. This has caused personal problems in my life because this problem has existed for a long time. I'll share with you a small incident. Years ago, my wife had a stalker. That stalker went to prison. And when we met Don Shooter 6 years ago, she began to see similar character traits in Don. These escalated to the point when my chapter was developed in 2016 of great escalation on Don's part towards my wife and I. To the point where I think most of you have not seen her here in the past 18 months. She refuses to come to the Capitol. She no longer participates because it's dredged up those feelings, because she feels threatened by Don Shooter, my seatmate. I can't imagine a situation in any business in the state that would allow or tolerate or put up with or look the other way or make excuses for this type of bad behavior. It's a serial, escalating bad behavior. After this report was done, findings were shared with Mr. Shooter for his comments. On opening day, I received a threat from Mr. Shooter for these comments. Now remember, I was only responding to what his actions had been. But I received a threat that he was out to get me, whatever that means. Today, we are aware that other threats were made against other victims. Today, as his life begins to unwind in terms of the legislative life, which I believe is his identity. We have a decision to make as members here. This is our job. Yes, the voters put Don and me here from the same district, but our job is to cleanse and take care of ourselves when something like this happens. We don't leave it to the voters. When the problem is so egregious and the morality so low, it is our duty to take care of this body and to expel him from it. Anything else, in my opinion, is just abdicating your responsibility. I vote yes, and I hope that on Monday we can all come back together and actually start the business of the state and put this behind us and close this permanent bad chapter in legislative history behind us. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell votes aye. Mr. Thorpe?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you. This is a very sad, frustrating day for this body, for the legislature, for this institution.
Mr. Speaker, silence is action. Over the years, Republican and Democratic leadership in both the House and the Senate have had a blind eye to all kinds of bad behavior and haven't addressed it. Silence is action. Too often, bad behavior is not addressed, which means that the behavior continues unaddressed and unchecked. Silence is action. I do appreciate very much, Mr. Speaker, that you're not being silent on this issue. And I appreciate very much the difficult position that you've been placed in. You've been second-guessed and you've been challenged as far as why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that. All of us in this room are in a very difficult situation today, and we have decisions to make accordingly. The other day, you made a recommendation in our caucus for a censure, and I was going to follow your lead. A couple hour ago or so, I found out that you had changed your mind, and I felt very frustrated that you had changed your mind because it put us in an even more difficult situation as a body. But I did appreciate very much that you invited us back into your office so that you could explain why you made that decision. And my understanding is that it was a difficult decision for you, and that you had that conversation with Representative Shooter, and once again trying to give him an out, a way to avoid what we're doing right now. So with that, sir, I would just like to say thank you. This has been tough on you, it's been tough on the staff, and it's been tough on the members. And I appreciate the leadership that you've shown in this, in trying to navigate these unnavigable waters. So with that, I'm going to do the same exact thing I had decided I was going to do 2 days ago. I'm going to follow your suggestion and your lead. And with that, I vote aye.
Mr. Thorpe votes aye. Ms. Blanc.
Mr. Speaker, may I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
First of all, to all of those on this report, I want to say thank you. As I read this, it affected me. It is clear, it is evident there needs to be a change. I have to tell you, I have not been sexually harassed, but I can tell you from personal experience with an incident as recent as this week, that this in fact is a hostile work environment for women. For reasons that I believe are gender-based, I have been silenced, diminished, and humiliated in committee. It must stop. To me, it's pretty simple. We must treat each other with kindness and respect. But more importantly, we as a body, we must hold ourselves to a much higher standard. And for that reason, I vote aye.
Ms. Blanc votes aye. Ms. Cobb.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, can I rise to explain my vote?
Please proceed.
This is a difficult day for all of us. But I think it comes down to a code of conduct, code of ethics. And, you know, Mr. Bowers talked about the circle of respect, the circle of responsibility that we have for one another. This morning I asked my friend, Mr. Shooter, to respect all of us and to make a hard decision himself. He chose not to. Yesterday, when we were all given, or a couple of days ago when we were given the report, I thought I was going to read that report and know a lot of the things that were in that report already, So I didn't think it was going to be one of those things that it was going to be any surprise to me. But what was a surprise to me is how I felt as I went through the report. There was a lot of incidentals and comments that I giggled at, I laughed at, but there were some incidences that I went in there that I felt sad with. And I was surprised at how I put the report down and felt like, why am I here? Why are we here? Do I want to be here? Do I want to be part of this? And I'm sure all of you thought those same things. This is not a day we want to all have. And I'm not sure that I do want to be here next year because of what has happened. But I think of all the good things we do too. And we do good things down here. And this morning, when I came in here at dark and went into my office for about an hour and just thought about, what am I going to do today? How am I going to make this decision? Because this is a friend, and this is a report I've read, and how do I make my decision? But I think it all comes down to, again, our code of conduct, our ethics, and what we feel about each other, and how we respond to each other. And after the events this morning, the letter that came out, and then some comments that were made about the other victim, even though I feel this report is incomplete, I feel like that we only have one choice, and that is to vote yes. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I vote yes.
Ms. Comp votes aye. Ms. Alston.
Mr. Speaker, I arise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I had not planned to speak today. However, Mr. Bowers, you triggered in me something that required me to stand and talk. Mr. Speaker and members, I love this institution. Absolutely love this institution. And Mr. Bowers, you said it was because you were a conservative that you had a responsibility, or maybe I misheard. That's possible. But it is also my responsibility as a progressive liberal and a member of this institution that I love to stand before you today and make a vote that is, of all the thousands I've cast since 1977, over 40 years, non-continuous, this is on a par with two other difficult votes that I have made. One was to impeach a governor. The other was to expel a Democratic colleague in the Senate. Today, I stand before you with a broken heart, not ever expecting that I would have to make a vote of this significance and nature ever again. But I stand not only with all the women in the legislature, both here and in the Senate, but I also stand for our daughters, our granddaughters, our future colleagues. And even though my heart breaks, I realize that this is a necessary vote that I have to make. And with a broken heart, Mr. Speaker, I vote no. I vote yes.
Ms. Alston votes aye. Ms. Rios.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you. As has been mentioned time and again, this is a difficult day for everyone. This is an incredibly unfortunate event for everyone, and especially for Representative Shooter. Absolutely no one is happy about what is happening today, and I know none of us take this lightly, least of all me. I know how incredibly hard we have all worked to be here, and how seriously we take our position, and how important this job is to all of us. And so to be faced with having to vote to take someone's seat away, that is heartbreaking, and that is incredibly difficult. But I think it's also critical that we acknowledge that this independent report that has been provided to all of us has shown that there has been, unfortunately, a pervasive pattern of inappropriate behavior by Representative Shooter. You know, the fate of any bill or an agency's budget should depend solely on its merits, not on whether the appropriations chairman or any other powerful lawmaker finds a lobbyist or a colleague attractive, or whether that lobbyist or colleague responds to his advances. This report, unfortunately, conclusively shows that for a span of years, this has not been the case at the Arizona legislature when it comes to Representative Shooter. We can't undo what's been done, but the one thing we can do is take steps to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Representative Shooter asked all of us to vote our conscience, and that is what I am doing today, and with a heavy heart, I vote yes. Thank you.
Mr. Rios votes aye. Mr. Boyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought that while we're waiting for a few folks to vote here, I'd share a few words. When this vote is done, which it looks like it will be here pretty shortly, and whether we have business today on the floor or come back Monday, and of course we'll come back Monday, but when we perform our regular duties on Monday, I thought it important to just share a few words from that great Roman statesman Cicero. This is a letter to his son on duties. It was the last letter he wrote that I'm aware of. He wanted to protect it. He valued the Republic, and he didn't like that it was going towards what it became, the empire, and he lost his life for it. This is what he wrote to his son. In general, those who are about to take charge of public affairs should hold fast to Plato's two pieces of advice. First, to fix their gaze so firmly on what is beneficial to the citizens that whatever they do with that in mind, forgetful of their own advantage. Secondly, let them care for the whole body of the Republic, rather than protect one part and neglect the rest. The management of the Republic is like a guardianship and must be conducted in the light of what is beneficial not to the guardians, but to those who are put in their charge. With that, I vote aye.
Mr. Boyer votes aye. Ms. Saltman.
I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I want to say that it's a coincidence that several members wore red to honor and raise awareness for women's heart health. And today we have an opportunity to heal the hearts of many women by taking a step towards justice. And speaking from the heart, I want to publicly and personally thank my colleague for her courage to speak out to unknown cost to herself. As everyone knows, I am someone who also decided to publicly share my own experience. And I want to say to the women who chose to stay silent, I respect that. And we're with you. And the last comment I want to make is that I implore everyone that this is just a beginning for doing the right thing and to eradicate sexual harassment from the workplace. It's gone on for way too long. And with that, I vote yes.
Saltman votes aye. Mr. Mosley.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
You know, I wish that a couple months ago Mr. Shooter had resigned and that we wouldn't have had to go through this. But we are here, and it's hard for us to make judgment on others because we are all imperfect in so many ways. Each of us have our own sins and our own frailties and faults. But we do need to take a stand and do what's right for the body that we so cherish, to represent the great people of Arizona, a state that is very close to my heart, that I grew up in, so that we can write the statutes and keep Arizona free and a great state. And with that, I vote aye.
Mr. Mosley votes aye. Mr. Grantham.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I just wanted to make a comment. Being a freshman in this body and having not had any prior experience here, we're dealing with something that goes back quite a few years. And I'm sitting here thinking about how to vote. I've known many of the individuals outlined in the report. I consider them friends, if not all of them. And I feel terrible for every single one of them. I think there's a lot of awful behavior outlined in the report on multiple fronts. I think it's despicable and it has no place in this body. I also find it unfortunate that we're here dealing with something that could have been dealt with up to 7, 8 years ago. That bothers me. And I would encourage people who are experiencing these types of behaviors or these types of treatments to come forward. Make your voice heard. Don't wait. Most of the people that could have done something about this a long, long time ago aren't even here anymore. And I'm not going to cry a river about how this is unfair to this body, but it sure makes it difficult to make a decision based on knowing someone for 18 months who we've worked with, passed bills with, gone to committee with. But it doesn't make it right. The behaviors outlined in the report are inexcusable. I came here today ready to vote to censure Mr. Shooter. And it's been very difficult to change that thought process in such a short amount of time this morning based on circumstances, quite honestly, that it appears were brought on by himself. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I vote aye.
Mr. Grantham votes aye. Ms. Nutt.
Rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
I don't want to be here right now. This is not okay. Mr. Grantham said it well. Mr. Bowers couldn't have said it better, and Mr. Thorpe. You guys need to knock it off. What we're doing here is important. We have kids down here on this floor and in these desks. We're supposed to be an example to them. This is not okay. People that make these accusations have done similar things, and you need to knock it off. I do not appreciate having to do this vote. I was willing to censor Mr. Shooter. I do not appreciate having to make a vote to expel him. But I will. With that, I vote yes.
Ms. Nutt votes aye. Mr. Martinez.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
You know, in the recent weeks, that we've been dealing with this, I have put myself on an island with my own position on some things in this house. I have a graduate degree in leadership, and I know what the principles, I know what the traits, and I will know what the characteristics of leadership are. And I believe, as Ms. Nutt was just saying, is that, we need to live up to what is expected of us in this house by every member, women and men. And, I was listening to Representative Blanc about her being silenced. You know what? We represent the people. We will not be silenced. I will not be silenced. And I will continue to speak up about issues that I believe and I have conviction on. It's not about being reelected. It's about the oath that we take. And it's about the people's trust that we represent. And I believe that we haven't done a very good job here. As a freshman legislator, as a former prison administrator, I've terminated people for sexual harassment. I put them on leave for sexual harassment. And so I've dealt with sexual harassment in a different context, but it's still the same thing. It's offending other people. I make my decision based on my daughter, Selena, and the 5 sisters that I have, because I know that my mother, my nana, my 5 sisters, and my daughter, they would not accept being treated any way, form, or fashion as some of what I've heard. I think one of the determining factors for me in this report was listening to Representative Mitchell. I can't even comprehend, getting drug into this where it's affecting my family. But just keep one thing in mind, colleagues. Everything that happens to us in this house, it affects our family. It affects our kids. Who do we go home and talk to when we leave here? So with that, Mr. Speaker, I vote aye.
Mr. Martinez votes aye. Ms. Gabaldon.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Sometimes I can't find the words in regards to I'm so proud to be here today among all of you. But I want to share these words with you regarding leadership that someone shared with me. So allow me to quote, "Leadership is not a rank. Leadership is a choice. It is the choice to look after the person to the left and the person to the right of you." I heard a story about a former Undersecretary of Defense who gave a speech at a large conference. He took his place on the stage and began talking, sharing his prepared remarks with the audience. He paused, took a sip of coffee from a styrofoam cup. He brought it on stage with them. He took another sip, looked down at the cup, and smiled. "You know," he said, interrupting his own speech, "I spoke here last year. I presented at the same conference on the same stage. But last year, I was still an undersecretary," he said. "I flew there in business class, and when I landed, there was someone waiting for me at the airport to take me to my hotel. Upon arriving at my hotel," he continued, "there was someone else waiting for me. They had already checked me into the hotel, so they handed me my key and escorted me to my room. The next morning, when I came down, again, there was someone waiting for me in the lobby to drive me to the same venue that we are here today. I was taken through a back entrance, shown to the green room, and handed a cup of coffee in a beautiful ceramic cup. But this year, as I stand here to speak to you, I'm no longer the undersecretary," he continued. "I flew here, coach, and when I arrived at the airport yesterday, there was no one there to meet me. I took a taxi to the hotel, and when I got there, I checked myself in and went by myself to my room. This morning, I came down to the lobby and caught another taxi to come here. I came in the front door and found my way backstage. Once there, I asked one of the techs if there was any coffee. He pointed to the coffee machine on the table against the wall. So I walked over and I poured myself a cup of coffee in this here styrofoam cup," he said, as he raised the cup to show the audience. "It occurs to me," he continued, "the ceramic cup they gave me last year, it was never meant for me at all. It was meant for the position I held. I deserve a styrofoam cup. This is the most important lesson I can impart to all of you," he offered. "All the perks, all the benefits and advantages you may get for the rank or position you hold, they aren't meant for you. They are meant for the role you fill. And when you leave your role, which eventually you will, they will give that ceramic cup to the person who replaces you because you only ever deserved a styrofoam cup." Ladies and gentlemen, we are leaders, and we're not going to be here. Well, hopefully we'll be here for a long time. But ladies and gentlemen, I enjoy my coffee in a styrofoam cup. And sometimes I do get my beverages in a better cup. But ladies and gentlemen, today we stand as leaders. And I'm very proud that I'm here serving along with you. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I vote aye.
Gabaldon votes aye. Mr. Clodfelter.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for point of personal privilege to explain my vote.
Please explain your vote.
Thank you. Several of us have spoken out as being freshmen in this body, as I am. And I won't speak for them. I'm only speaking for myself. But I'm sure they might share some of my sentiment. Coming to this body, at least I did, when I came here, I was filled with enthusiasm and finding an opportunity to serve the people of my community and the people of my state. I look forward to working with everybody here, and over the last year or so I've become friends with many of you and colleagues with many of you, and we've had our differences through the discourse and the challenge of debate and philosophies, and there's been tense times. This is one of those tense times. This is a vote that I never, ever, ever would have expected to have to make at all. I've become friends with all of you, and I've become good friends with Mr. Shooter, and I'm saddened by the situation that puts us in this position. This will be, I hope, the last vote I will ever have to make like this, and it is with tremendous sadness and tremendous reluctance that I will be voting aye for the expulsion of my friend and colleague, Mr. Shooter. With that, I vote aye.
Mr. Clodfelter votes aye. Mr. Toma.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. To be blunt and direct with everyone, I had no intention of speaking today, but after listening to Representative Nutt's heartfelt plea, something just made me get up and say something and explain my vote here. It is a sad day. I agree. It's a sad day. It's a difficult position. I agree with Representative Stringer that there are some significant due process issues with the way this was done. I also agree with Representative Campbell that none of us are perfect. All of us make mistakes in many ways. Regardless of gender, by the way, we are all not perfect. But I also happen to think, especially as many have mentioned here, those of us that are freshmen, I came here expecting a high bar, expecting that there would be a higher standard for us, and that we would be held to that higher standard. Again, regardless of gender, right? Regardless of what you do. As a father of 5 beautiful girls and a husband to a beautiful and amazing wife, sexual harassment concerns me quite a bit. There is no excuse for this type of behavior. I happen to agree in the short time that I've been here that Representative Shooter has been kind to me. That's my only experience. And I hate the fact that I have to make this vote. But we are here to represent. We are here to lead, as Representative Gabaldon just said. How can you lead when you do things like this? As much as I have issues with the process, as I stated earlier, I don't think you can be effective if you're not ultimately at least trying to be a virtuous and honest person. I agree with Representative Clark that we as men need to stand up and hold each other accountable. But I think that, again, that applies to you ladies as well. It's not a gender thing. This particular situation, sure, is sexual harassment by a male colleague to numerous women, which is horrendous. But this is something that should affect all of us, regardless of where you've come from. If you are in this body, you should be held to a higher standard. And so I encourage us all to search our hearts, search our minds, and anything that's happened, as Representative Grantham had stated, long before many of us were here. It's time to change the culture here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I vote aye.
Mr. Toma votes aye. Ms. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we've been tested. We've been tested, and this has been really hard for all of us. when I came here and I was elected as a freshman, it was vastly different in that I can say that we've come a long way. One of my early goals here was to fight the retaliation that people experienced when they angered somebody and that person would kill their bill out of spite. I said that was wrong. I was told, it's the way it's always been, there's nothing you can do about it. That doesn't happen very often anymore. Matter of fact, I haven't heard that happening at all lately. And that was because of you. Many of you listened and you agreed. One of those people was our speaker. He agreed. Retaliation is wrong. I found a culture down here when I was elected that was shocking. And I committed to doing everything I could to make it change. And I wasn't the only one. There's dignity in this body more than there was when we founded. And I thank the speaker for bringing that ball forward. We have a long way to go. I want the public to understand we don't have protection like the corporate world has protection. There is no HR department here. And that's why we're standing here today. I'm committed, as I know all of you are also committed, to leave this body better than when we found it. So I'm asking that we continue to work out the kinks of the policies that we try to put into place to prevent this from happening in the future. And I stand here in a room not filled with Republicans and Democrats. Today we are human beings joining together to have to do something very difficult. I don't see Republicans and I don't see Democrats and I don't see men versus women. I see statesmen, not politicians. Statesmen who know that they have to do what's right, not for the outcome of how that impacts their next election, not for how that impacts their friendships, but they're doing what's right. I want to draw attention to Representative Mitchell. With his permission, he let me mention this story he told me yesterday. Someone told him, if you move forward with this, you'll never be Speaker of the House if you do this, meaning move for expulsion. And his answer, then I don't want to be Speaker of the House. Let the chips fall where they may, essentially is what I'm paraphrasing. But he said he was okay with that because it was what was right. I'm proud of that. I was so relieved to hear him say that. I'm proud of you guys for making this difficult decision. We have ways to go. We have procedures that we have to put into place, standardized procedures for legal reasons. And I know the speaker will work to try and do as best as we can to make that better. I talked to a lot of you in discussing what to do, taking the temperature of the body to see where we were. And I know a lot of you have really struggled with the decision. I think it's the best due diligence that we've had, is to try and explore whether we expel, whether we just censure, all these different options. That was the due diligence that we had at our disposal. And you guys did that. I think we can do better, and we will. I agree this isn't a female or a men issue. I have daughters, but I also have a son. And what I heard about Representative Mitchell's part in this investigation was horrific. I couldn't imagine that happening to my son. So, thank you for being here and doing your due diligence to come to the decisions you've made. I know that the procedure wasn't perfect as far as the due process goes. I have my own criticism of that procedure, but it doesn't negate the admission of guilt with the cavalier attitude and the joking. It was that alone, not the process, but that alone, the admission, is what caused me to know that we were left without a choice. We have no choice. And with that, I vote aye.
Ms. Townsend votes aye. Members, I'm going to explain my vote. On Tuesday, I spoke with both of the caucuses and outlined the actions I was going to take against Mr. Shooter. They included a censure, which is the greatest form of punishment we can do short of expulsion. I knew that putting that on the table, some would think that was too harsh. Some would think it wasn't enough. And I fully respected the differing opinions. This is a judgment call. We're all here to, unfortunately, play judge over one of our colleagues. I also told Mr. Shooter that if there was any more behavior like this, any more retaliation, harassment of any kind, I would move to expel. And he accepted that. When I woke up this morning, I was comfortable with censure. When I came in this morning, I came into a letter that Mr. Shooter had sent out. The letter on its face appeared to be advocating for a victim, suggesting that they weren't happy with the investigation or that certain facts were left out. And that was concerning to me. So I did something I had never done before. I had up until this point stayed out of any contact with any of the folks in the investigation unless they had contacted me. So I contacted this individual and I spoke with them about the letter from Mr. Shooter. And I can categorically say it does not reflect that individual's feelings about the report. It was then that I realized Representative Shooter's letter was nothing more than an effort to use this individual as a pawn, despite repeated requests from the individual's attorney that Mr. Shooter not do anything to jeopardize the individual's anonymity. So he was not, in fact, standing up for the victim, but rather further victimizing this person. At that moment, I decided to change my motion from censure to expel. It was not an easy decision, as you all know. This is a horrifying day. It's horrifying for a lot of reasons. It's no small thing to override the will of the voters in LD 13. It's horrifying because Mr. Shooter in his time down here has done good things for the state and his constituents and probably will only be remembered for this. It's horrifying because while some on the outside might think this is just an easy thing to kick somebody out, we are family here. Republicans, Democrats, men, women, old, young, we're family. And we've just expelled somebody from this family. But at some point, we as elected officials are held to the highest of standards and must make those difficult decisions even if it is a member of our family. You heard my statement on opening day that I was calling on all of us to treat others how we wanted to be treated. I read through that report, I processed it, I encouraged you all to read through it and process it and get to a moment where you would vote your conscience. I respect every single person here today whether they voted yes or no, as having fulfilled a vote of their conscience. I wish no ill will of Mr. Shooter. I think he has done good things for his constituents. And he's also made some very, very bad decisions that have injured this institution and put us in this situation. I pleaded with Mr. Shooter to resign, to not force this vote. He would not back down, and that's his right. But had he agreed to resign, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. In closing, I want to say this. I appreciate the courage that it took for those who are in the report to come forward. And I ask that anyone out there who has any sort of allegation of some misconduct by us, not to be afraid to show the same kind of courage that was shown by those who came forward. Because we as elected officials must be held to the highest of standards. I vote aye. Clerk will record the vote. By a vote of 56 ayes, 3 nays, 1 not voting, you passed H.R. 2003. Signed in open session. The clerk will record the action of the House. Mr. Shooter is expelled. The clerk will transmit the resolution to the Secretary of State. Without objection, the reading of the Journal of Wednesday, January 31, 2018 is dispensed with and approved as written. Reports of standing committees, without objection, reports of standing committees as listed on the calendar will not be read. The reports will be entered in the Journal and placed on the House calendar. Mr. Shope.
Mr. Speaker, your permission, your Committee on Rules will be meeting in HR 4 at 1 p.m. on Monday.
Thank you. Members, are there any other points of personal privilege before we adjourn? Mr. Majority Leader, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand adjourned until 1:15 p.m. Monday, February 5th, 2018.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes here to have it do have it. So ordered. We're adjourned.